Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. But this week has shown me that, we are certainly at a turning point when it comes especially to the subject of immigration. Now, usually with my Reacting to Extreme Britain series, it's Politics Joe going around doing vox pops in certain areas of the UK, asking about current political questions, but this time around I'm actually reacting to one of their podcasts. Because this is a podcast between two Irish immigrants in London talking about Keir Starmer's white paper on immigration and why they think it's crazy. And I thought that would be much more interesting than talking about the actual vox pop they did this week, which was about fox hunting, because I don't think even my audience is ready for my opinion on fox hunting. So let's get into some of the clips and arguments then. Here is Laura Beveridge giving an introduction into what Keir Starmer was saying in his speech.
He said, "We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that works forward together." And Zara Sultana picked that up quite quickly and compared it to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. It is interesting that both Enoch Powell and Keir Starmer have referenced this idea of strangers and strangeness to do with immigration.
Yeah, well, I mean, quite literally, if you have people coming over from other countries with different cultures, different attitudes, they are going to seem strange to your average Brit, where effectively the overarching culture and common attitudes, which have been developed in some cases over centuries, in some cases in the last 5 minutes, are seen as, particularly in some cases, abrasive, and in other cases they can fit right in. And for some people it will take more time to integrate, for others not so much, and for some people it will be completely impossible. And it's that impossibility, or the people who are taking too much time to integrate, which is where the problem comes in, and where the idea of there being people here who are strangers really comes into play. For example, think of, Whitechapel Station having to have, I want to say that's the Bangladeshi language, but this is the thing, I don't know. It's strange to me. It is a language of strangers. I don't know anyone that speaks this language, and I certainly do not come across them in day-to-day life. In fact, I think I'd go as far as to say I don't know anyone that speaks this language, because I've never been to Bangladesh, and I have not met Bangladeshis. Now, I've met Sri Lankans, I've met Pakistanis, I've met French people, and to different degrees, they're integrated. The French person wasn't integrated at all and barely knew any English because it was one of my friend's cousins. And for instance, when he introduced himself to me, he tried kissing me on the cheek, as the French do, and I thought that was very strange. However, the Sri Lankan, I guess I'll use as the other example, spoke a bit of Hindi, I think is the language of Sri Lanka, I'm not actually sure. Never heard her speak it. She only spoke English and had an incredibly English accent, much more integrated than the French example that I just had. Now the problem is that it doesn't really matter from where, but clearly in the Whitechapel example here, again I assume this is the Bangladeshi language, I'm not sure because it's strange to me, which is just reinforcing my point. That is there simply because there is a large group of people in the Whitechapel area who don't speak English and only speak this other language. These are strangers and can only be strangers because how is any English person supposed to, maybe not any, but the average English person supposed to have any sort of relationship beyond making strange hand signals to them to communicate and form any sort of, relationship with them? They can only be strangers. And this is a problem that is quite large in the UK, and one that has been very much noticed by more and more of the population. In Enoch Powell's time, there were a few pockets of this. Now there are pockets of this in, a large amount of pockets of this in pretty much every major city. It is a problem that has not gone away and obviously needs to be addressed. I will say on this, though, they are quite reasonable with what they say about the Enoch Powell comparison.
But whether it was a deliberate reference to Enoch Powell or not, what definitely was deliberate was the choice of rhetoric and language that Keir Starmer was using to announce this white paper.
Yeah, I'd think you'd have to be pretty mad to think that Keir Starmer, of all people, would try to be aping the language of Enoch Powell. To me, it's kind of a coincidence, and I don't think the Labour team would be, let's say, historically aware enough to realise that this was, yes, actually quite similar to the Rivers of Blood speech, because frankly, as far as I can tell, 90% of people who talk about it haven't even read the damn thing. And it's a very good speech, and one that I will defend till the end of time.
which was like the language of crackdown and strangers and being tough on immigration. And I think what we have to be clear about is this white paper was introducing reforms on legal migration. So it isn't to do with the sort of migration that we see in the media and that people get very angry about, which is the small boats crossings and the asylum hotels.
Well, that gets people angry because it should be, frankly, a really simple solution of, people are even on board with the Tory idea of just send them to Rwanda. But genuinely, a popular opinion seems to be get the Navy out there and turn them around. And that's not being done, and nobody seems to be pushing for that apart from, obviously, reform. And it's obvious that what every major party is doing is effectively pivoting toward the reform position. The thing is, and I went through this in yesterday's stream, as much as as some people on the right are saying that people like Starmer and Jenrick even are outflanking reform on the right, it's simply not true. There is no other party pushing for the Navy to be involved in turning the boats around, and then when it comes to legal migration, there's either no cap, or if there is a cap, it's net hundreds of thousands. Again, who are we trusting more on this?
The measures that are being proposed in this white paper has nothing to do with that. But perhaps listening to a lot of the news coverage and the coverage from the Starmer government themselves, you might not be aware of that.
No, I think you would be. It's a very kind of left-wing echo chamber thing to think that the only problem with immigration that people care about is illegal. No, legal's been a problem for a long time. Enoch Powell's speech was very popular at the time, despite the fact it got him kicked out of the Tory party. And in the long term, I think the Tories largely counter-singling Enoch Powell was probably actually to their own detriment. And at this point, for me, it's a basic test of how serious is this Tory politician. People like Jacob Rees-Mogg, I like him for a number of reasons, but I won't trust him simply because he still lies about the Enoch Powell speech. And I don't have time for it. But anyway, we'll move on to more specifics of the white paper, because it's worth pointing out at this point that the title for this video was Why Starmer's New Immigration Policy Makes No Sense. So I'd love to see why, because I'm actually going to do something I quite rarely do on this channel and actually defend Starmer. Because, as I said in all the videos this week, the white paper, it wasn't actually that bad. Nowhere near what we need, but better than I was ever expecting from Labour. So do take it away, Politics Joe.
So I think, first of all, is the English language requirements, which you touched on earlier, which is they're going to raise, basically, the proficiency in English that you need.
Yeah, if you come over to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, you should at the very least know English. Or if you really want to, I guess Welsh or Gaelic, but I don't think that's going to get you very far with most people outside of a few of the communities in Wales and Scotland. But English, pretty good baseline, yeah. If you come over, you should definitely be able to have a good conversation in English. I think that would definitely help.
Which I think what we're talking about here is people that are coming here on student or work visas. So it makes sense that if you're coming to work in the UK or study in the UK, that you would need some level of proficiency in English.
Well, all right, this is a really good start for the title, Why Starmer's New Immigration Policy Makes No Sense, already. Oh, this one makes a lot of sense, actually. Great. I have been officially clickbaited. Great. Let's hope that they actually make some other points that I can actually defend Starmer on, given that I promised I would at the start.
Like, again, just for clarity, like, we're not talking about people that are coming here on, like, the Afghan visa, people that were fleeing war, or, like, the Ukraine visa, and people that are coming here as refugees.
Okay, but I still think these standards should apply to them, to be quite honest. To be honest with you, I mean, most Ukrainians probably know English anyway, given it's the universal language of commerce. It's a great thing about having an empire that spanned a third of the planet. Everyone does indeed know your language, and it's made me very lazy at that, but I do know other English people who do very well with their foreign languages. But the other main point that people had for bringing over Afghanistanis as refugees was an awful lot of them, they worked with the British. They were translators or interpreters and things like that. So this standard would probably apply to them anyway by default. And to be honest with you, the other issue you have is you get an awful lot of dependents who can come over with, refugees as well as people on work visas and even student visas. And they should obviously have this test too. Because how are they supposed to function and integrate into this society? The other thing is that ideally these work and student visas are supposed to be temporary anyway, 3 years at the most. I guess if you're doing a PhD, it can be extended. So the question really has to be asked, why are dependents being brought over if it's such a small-scale visa that you're reliant on. Again, I've known my own father to have worked abroad for months at a time, and at no point did he ever have the right to bring his family over apart from on a travel visa, which I don't think they bothered with because he was only away for 6 months. I say they rather than we because I wasn't even born at this point, but there we go.
However, I think it's still maybe a rogue opinion, but I don't think it's a bad idea for anybody that's coming into any country to learn some sort of proficiency in the language of that country.
Pretty incredible you can possibly pull this video, Starmer's new immigration policy makes no sense, and go straight on to actually kind of the major point of the policy makes a lot of sense. And it would only take a mad leftist to say, oh, it's rogue to say that this is sensible, especially when he goes on to say this.
I don't think it's a bad idea either way for you to be learning English. I mean, countries like Germany do it, you know.
Yeah, almost every country in the world does it that's sensible. It makes sense. You want to come to Germany, speak German. You want to go to France, speak French. Not necessarily as a tourist, obviously, but if you plan to stay there for a prolonged period of time, say anything over a year, yeah, it makes sense. You know, like before my father went to Sweden. He never learned Swedish, but he was only there for 6 months. And obviously it's a bit different because English, international language of commerce, etc., etc. We're in a unique position where we have a language that everyone should kind of be speaking anyway, especially if they're high-skilled and professional. So realistically, this probably shouldn't even be legislation, but we're at a point where there's so many people and dependents coming in, it's kind of required.
I think the other point that is important on the care worker and ending the recruitment is that in the white paper, Labour said to fill this gap, what they would do is improve paying conditions in the sector for workers, which I thought was quite a shocking thing to say, because essentially what you're saying then is that you're happy to have 2 tiers of workers' rights.
No, that's basic economics. If there is less supply of care workers, you obviously need to pay more for the care sector to advertise and incentivise people to join the care sector. In fact, as shown from this graph, ever since the Boris wave, which was basically 2020 onwards, we've seen care worker wages were actually way above in real terms, in fact, the national living wage. And as time has gone on and more people have been brought over to go into the care sector, as you can see, the price has just gotten way cheaper because you've had more people to fill up the vacancies. And these vacancies are about, I think it only accounts for about a fifth of the workforce, but either way, even just filling up a fifth of the workforce with foreign workers causes, effectively, their wage to be compressed down to minimum wage. And we've been seeing that all over the place. So it's not 2 tiers at all. It's just, this is actually how it used to work. And thanks to Boris Johnson and, yes, in fact, Dominic Cummings, well, we ended up with this situation.
One's for people that come over here on workers' visas as immigrants to the country, and one for your white British person.
Yeah, you've completely misunderstood how this all works. Public sector care workers will all be paid the same rate in the same area. They might be paid slightly higher in London, whether they're foreign or not. So, well done for misunderstanding.
Yep.
Even though already there are many white British people working in the social care sector, essentially you're happy for them to be on lower paying conditions than you know they should be.
Yeah.
Well, no, hang on. That's what Boris Johnson did. I just went through that graph. Boris Johnson literally brought in the Boris wave, mainly to help out the care sector, and this is what's happened to it. So, actually, it's not Keir Starmer, of all people, who is putting people on lower wages here. So, good one.
What does it say as well for those people that work in the sector already, that they have not gotten a pay rise up until this point? Like, the only thing that's giving them a pay rise is we want to get rid of all of the non-English people in the sector.
I mean, it should be absolutely no surprise to anyone that pretty much everyone at Politics Joe calls themselves a socialist, and this complete misunderstanding of how supply and demand works in the labour market is an absolutely huge evidence, and just adds to the heap of examples of socialists not understanding any basic thing about economics. You have less labour supply in a sector, those wages will rise. There's not many people, say, who want to be CEOs or have the capability of being CEOs, and so they get paid absolutely loads. Pretty much anyone can be, say, a shop worker, and so they're paid minimum wage. It's as simple as that.
The other thing which you touched on was the increased residency before you can claim citizenship. So they want to increase it to 10 years of residency before you can claim citizenship.
Yes, good. Do that. That would be I'd be very grateful for that, Starmer.
So they want to disapply Article 8, which is the ECHR's right to family life from immigrants who have committed a crime in the UK, and often in the courts, that right to family life is used as an appeal for a reason why people who've committed a crime while on a visa should be allowed to stay in the UK.
Again, this is better than nothing, but I'm completely with reform and just get rid of the ECHR, completely redo the Human Rights Act. It's ridiculous, and getting rid of this right to a family life, that's kind of one of many things that they have been trying to use to appeal and stay in the country. And that's because the ECHR and the Human Rights Act have an awful lot of ways you can appeal. That's why it all needs to go.
And they're proposing revoking that right for immigrants to the country. Nadia Whittam was very concerned about that because of the precedent it sets when you're allowed to start disapplying certain aspects of human rights from immigrants. That is a slippery slope and quite a concerning precedent, she was arguing.
It's the old classic from the left. Yep, you get rid of something that's got human rights attached to it or something like that. All of a sudden, all of these rights and privileges that the British have been enjoying for over a century before the Human Rights Act was ever put in place, that means all of a sudden they're all under attack and they're literally coming after your human rights. It's about time we ended this rhetorical trick. And luckily everyone seems to be wanting to put it to bed.
And then the final group that this really applies to is students and student visas. They're concerned about how many student visas are being given out and specifically at what institutions. I can't remember the wording that they used exactly, but basically they were saying that at the UK's top institutions, the applicants for international students has actually decreased by 7%. But at the institutions that perhaps have lower entry requirements to get in, they've increased by 49%.
Yeah, I've done videos on the scam before. Effectively, because of the incentives with the university system, which is effectively get as many bums on seats as you can, it means lowering the entry requirements. But not only that, when it comes to foreign students who end up having to pay up to 3 times the price per year of an average British student, that obviously means an awful lot more money for the universities, and so you'll have effectively recruitment agencies entirely brought about to effectively lie to foreign students and scam them into either taking on a massive debt or getting parents to pay an awful lot of money to British institutions, universities, because obviously we have some of the best higher education in the world, and from there, they're pretty much guaranteed, oh, you'll get jobs, you'll be fine, you'll be set for life, and they can end up going in with, like, a load of Ds in their A-level or equivalent, and obviously end up not getting the job, and some of them go in on this scam and, you know, they'll get the student visa, not pay their fees, and then just get lost in the system and claim asylum. That is also another thing that happens. So this is why the university sector is being looked at as well as everywhere else.
Obviously, the knock-on effect of this is funding for the universities, because a lot of universities now in the sector relies on international students. So their question will be, well, where are we getting funding from?
Well, hopefully nowhere, because an awful lot of, especially the ex-polytechnics, just aren't universities. They're not very good. They're always called by lecturers at the university I went to bums on seats universities. I mean, I didn't go to a Russell group, but I went to a long-established university institution. And yeah, this is how a lot of them function. It used to be affordable just to get as many people who did A-levels in our course as possible. Now, obviously, that's not quite as possible, so it's we rely on foreign students. As it turns out, the Russell groups aren't relying on them as much as I thought, which is actually even better, because that means, our better institutions can actually survive this. Again, this whole conversation from these two is ignoring the entire fact that, effectively, immigration has completely obfuscated the markets, and with the university now being effectively a market to pick up as many students as you can, and now international ones if you are not a Russell group, it's meant there are institutions that are succeeding when they frankly shouldn't, and it's made knock-on effects that people aren't willing to keep up these university or the university system as it exists, effectively to have more foreigners over. Of course they're not, but the commentary here is completely missing that fact.
If you're cracking down on how many students can stay, can come and
Yeah. I also wonder how much of the kind of the transfer from top universities to second tier university, for want of a better word, is to do with the change in non-EU and EU fees.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, EU students basically got a discount, and in fact, I think EU students got free university tuition from universities in Scotland. English people had to pay for it in Scotland. Not even joking. Genuinely one of the first things that radicalised me and made me think maybe Brexit has a point. Why am I paying 27 grand to go to uni for 3 years when some French guy can go to Scotland and do it for free? In fact, it's 4 years in Scotland. Even better value for money. These two Irish people, though, of course they're on the side of lower EU university fees. Of course they are. No, they've not looked into any of these issues. This is all entirely a vibes-based podcast, and I'm here to ruin the vibes.
So I'd wonder if that shift is down to Brexit. Well, we could blame everything on Brexit, actually, couldn't we, Laura?
Yes, Brexit has indeed led to a massive increase in the amount of foreigners coming over to Britain. You can blame Boris Johnson for that, but now you have to wonder, well, why is everything shifting right? Oh, it's because the voters keep demanding everyone move to the right, i.e. head toward reform.
I think also, if you're even talking about Brexit, it is kind of mad that Nigel Farage, the man who promised that migration to this country was going to be cut drastically by leaving the European Union, is now the same man that's saying that, well, if you vote for reform, we'll cut it drastically for the Europe. We'll cut migration drastically. And it's like, he promised you it the first time, it didn't happen.
See what I mean by vibes-based analysis on this particular podcast? What's the through line here? Why do you think that Nigel Farage said Brexit will mean less immigration, and now he's saying again, oh, we'll cut immigration? When was he ever in power? Again, do I really need to go through the timeline again? I guess I may as well. Brexit vote, thanks to Farage, ended up winning, thanks to Farage and vote leave. Ended up with Theresa May and the Tories trying their best to undermine the vote. That goes on for 3 years. Boris Johnson then comes in and says, I'll get Brexit done. Brexit Party comes out, who were a threat to the Tories to shift them rightward again. It ends up working because of the EU elections. You then get to the general election where they make a deal saying, right, let's keep Corbyn out and get Brexit done. We will stand down from all your safe seats, marginal seats, so the right-wingers only have one person to vote for. You end up with a massive landslide. COVID then happens, and Boris Johnson makes every terrible decision post-COVID, especially when it comes to immigration, and you end up with more than ever. At what point did Nigel Farage have really any say in any of this? The most he could do was say, right, we don't want Corbyn in, so screw everything up, so we'll let you win, Boris Johnson. Please don't betray us. Oh, he betrayed us. And there's even a clip of Nigel Farage saying, you won't see me in politics again, assuming the Tories do everything right. Well, they did everything wrong, and he's back. Just completely vibes-based. Oh, Farage is incompetent. When was Farage in power? Please tell me that. Oh, he wasn't. Incredible.
I'm just doing it again.
Yeah. Oh, it's only because I'm not in charge.
Well, yeah. Why are you saying that like it's almost not an argument? That's kind of a good argument. Why haven't I got my way? I wasn't in charge. Oh yeah, that actually makes sense. Unbelievable. It's amazing what silly things you can say when you're propped up by Irish millionaires, isn't it? Again, these are the type of people who are basically on a fast track to be going into the mainstream media. That's their career sorted, basically. You join Politics Joe, you will be joining the BBC at some point, or The Guardian, something like that.
On the student thing as well, though, I think it's interesting to remember that in last year's immigration numbers was when the headcount of students was included in the immigration numbers, which resulted in a big increase. I mean, there was an increase anyway, but a very significant increase in inward migration into the UK.
Yeah, well, as far as I'm aware, immigration stats count everyone who's coming over to settle and people who are only coming over temporarily. At the end of the day, they're still immigrants. They still count towards the statistics, and then you can go into details of it later. But it's pointed out by a lot of people, I doubt this is the majority of the people coming over on student visas, to be fair. But again, why do these people need to bring over dependents if they're only here temporarily? Why then are there some people who come over on student visas and then instantly try and get into the asylum system, where your visa's then basically meaningless until your asylum claim has been processed? Again, there's a lot of detail in the immigration debate that is just not being even discussed here. It's just purely, really, it is student politics. That's what this is. It's all vibes based and, oh, let me find the first reason I can muster to try and dismiss people like Farage. It's pathetic.
And so I'd wonder if, had there not been a change in how inward migration was measured, would students be part of the white paper whatsoever?
Well, yeah, because we still have statistics on student visas, and so if it was the case they didn't get incorporated into the overall number, you'd still know in, say, 2022, nearly 500,000 student visas were issued. They'd still absolutely be part of the conversation.
The other thing around language that I find interesting in this white paper is the difference between high skill and low skill work, and how Labour want to increase migration amongst high skill workers and decrease it amongst low skill. And in low skill they've included things like health and care work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, am I going to have to explain the difference between low skilled and high skilled? Am I going to have to do that? Come on.
But I think that's interesting, because surely those are the exact skills that we need in this country. Like, do we really need more consultants and wealth managers? Or do we need more care workers? And also, what's more valuable and productive for the economy?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not being funny, but a very large amount of people who've come over on work visas are care and health workers, and our economy is stagnated even more. So, there's every possibility that actually, yeah, we do need more financial consultants rather than health workers. I'm not bringing the graph up again, but as the graph said before, their wages have been compressed. They've not gone up, as you would expect, with their trend beforehand. Why is that? Well, because of all these care workers. And I know the reform position is actually care workers are probably one of the ones we shouldn't be so restrictive of when it comes to immigration. However, their long-term plan is, that's going to actually be solved in like 3 years, because it takes about 3 years to get a whole new care worker force out there that can deal with the shortage you'll inevitably have if you kick them all out overnight.
I mean, it's kind of taking every aspect of the well-being of a society in complete isolation from one another. Obviously, health and care are very important jobs. There is no high skill and low skill in any of these things.
Sorry, again, this is all just vibes. There is obviously a difference between a nursing assistant and a surgeon. There's obviously a difference between low and high skill there. Obviously, when it comes to healthcare, your doctors are going to be who you're probably okay with bringing more of, especially because it takes 7 years to train one in the UK. And that's a whole other scandal where we've shot ourselves in the foot because of the way unions want the whole thing to run. But that's not for this video. But you don't need a whole bunch of nursing assistants from other countries, especially when the English language requirement isn't quite there either. And even then, when it comes to the skilled section, there's been plenty of scandals of fraudsters coming from foreign countries with fake qualifications becoming nurses and causing all sorts of issues. And all these issues accumulate into effectively everyone being fed up with immigration. But because these two are Irish immigrants, they have to instinctively side on the side of the immigrants, even if it doesn't make any sense. I mean, for two journalists to say, do we really need more financial directors? Yeah, I'd much rather have 2 financial directors come here than you two. Talk about low skill. The bar for being a journalist these days is ridiculously low.
So to that point, it is just taking in isolation one thing, i.e. migration, and saying cutting migration is going to have no tangible impact on any of the other aspects of British society.
No, that's not the point here. The point is that if you take migration and cut it, it will have a positive impact on most of the rest of society. That's the point here. They wouldn't do it if they didn't think it had no impact. They're doing it because they think it will have an impact, and the main one being a result in hopefully more votes.
We're going to be able to plug the gaps in care, health, whatever it might be, with something.
Higher wages to incentivise British workers. A big problem we have at the moment is wage compression. It's not uncommon to hear people moving from graduate schemes into working as in either an admin role or even in a shop, and saying, yeah, I'm about 20 quid poorer a month, but I just feel so much better about having a shorter commute, say, working my 8 hours at the shop, and then being able to completely forget about it, getting shop discounts and other benefits from working at a shop, say, etc, 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 and therefore you're getting a lot of young people who'd rather be having those jobs or being on benefits than bothering to look for a work that can get them on a career ladder. And I can completely understand it. So, yeah, reducing migration, ironically, will have these entry-level positions have less labour supply given to them, and thereby they will probably end up raising in value and wage. Perfect, if you ask me.
You know, they're not saying what the other thing is. They're just saying, well, we're allowing people in for these high-skilled jobs, the nuclear scientists, the tech bros, the KPMG consultants.
Yeah, the jobs where typically people on those wages will be paying way more into the system than they'll take out over their lifetime. Yeah, that's typically how it works. And that's assuming they're here for longer than a temporary basis. Again, 2 immigrant journalists here saying, oh, do we really want more nuclear scientists? What about people like me? Yeah, I think your terms are acceptable.
But then don't worry about the NHS. The people who work in that, we'll find someone to work in that. Maybe the people that they're cutting PIP from are going to start working in the NHS.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll hire Deloitte to do some consultancy and they'll tell us what to do.
Well, again, as mentioned before, it depends what healthcare workers you're cutting. I don't think they're cutting doctors, and I don't think they should be cutting doctors without first dealing with the British Medical Association's complete and utter destruction of the, well, trainee to surgeon pipeline. And there's definitely a case that needs to be made on that to make sure that people coming over are actually as qualified as they say there are. But all I have really seen since this Starmer speech on Monday, along with the white paper, from the left, is effectively just all this vibes, all this, I just feel bad. I just feel a bit bad about going hard on immigration, you know? As if we've not had a completely suicidal policy on the damn thing for coming up to 20 years. And possibly even longer than that.
We'll just get rid of 5 hospitals and increase capacity in none of them, and increase staffing in none of them, and it's all going to work out fine. We're still going to reduce the waiting list. How? Because the assisted dying bill is coming through.
To be fair to them, pretty based ending. I am absolutely against the assisted dying bill for this reason. But I mean, the NHS is such a mess that, you know, with the amount of migration that we've had to help the NHS, it's not exactly got it into a state where it's functioning, so clearly it's not the silver bullet everyone said it would be. Anyway, I thought they'd have more interesting things to say, but I don't know why I kid myself with these things. Glad I went through it, but there you go, that's your entertainment for today. If you enjoy my channel, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and also become a channel member, or send a super chat or super thanks. Those are great ways to help out the channel. Thursday I'll be playing some Nautica, Saturday I'll be laughing at the Guardian with some whamming, and then there is a Tosh News next Tuesday. Right, videos out as and when I can make them. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.